There are a lot fewer two-parent families.
What's worth more, $1 today or $1 tomorrow?
Almost nobody gets out of love alive.
Prisoners' rights is out of sight, out of mind.
Is your brain on God?
You ain't ready to
There are discussions
how
as
they thought
black families have to have them.
What's worth more, $1 today or $1 tomorrow? What's worth more, $1
Welcome, folks, to your Reality Gurus, the show where we take a commonsensical approach to issues through complex conversation. I am your host, G. Cleve. About to get into some early morning spitballing, but I got my man here, DB. DB, say what's up to the people, brother.
Going on, people? How y'all feeling?
Yeah, also, man, we got another guest. I got my partner Ian here, man. You know, he's going to weigh in on this conversation that we have that DB actually has for us. So I'm going to hand it over to him. Let him go ahead and talk about it, man. So, DB, what's on your mind this morning?
So, you know, brother, a while back, I would say like maybe a couple of years ago, I was listening to this podcast, and it had this reporter on there. And what the reporter was doing, that she sat down, she has, you know, law enforcement friends. So she sat down with somebody in NYPD, and she looked at this video about Eric Garner, right? And they're both sitting down watching, and she's, you know, expressing the views that most people had about that situation. And then her cop friend was pretty much like, I don't see anything wrong. You know what I mean? Basically saying that, you know, he looked like he was resisting arrest. You know, that I think they did the right thing in that situation for the most part. And that kind of made me think on some aspects how when we look at certain situations, depending on your experience, you see it from a different point of view. You know what I mean? Like a civilian probably looks at it different from somebody in law enforcement. And being that I know, like, Jay, you have some law enforcement experience, I think, you know, other people might have, that I kind of want to put it out there and maybe try to get a handle on the different mind states and whatever else that comes with a lot of these situations that we see on TV, especially since the last few years. You just see them more and more and more, and this movement growing.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'll tell you, honestly, man, a lot of times I reserve judgment, you know, when, you know, some of these instances pop up. You know, these police shootings, and I usually do not rush to judgment simply because of the training that I've had. You know, a lot of times civilians do not look at it, or they can't look at it from a law enforcement personnel's point of view if they've never been there. But I know, you know, as far as training and stuff is concerned, stuff that we've gone through the law enforcement training, there's key things that we focus on. There's like situations that they put you in that actually stress you out, right? Because, you know, if you can perform under that type of pressure, you know, while you're practicing, you know, chances are you'll be able to, you know, handle that stuff way in the field. So I think a lot of times, you know, once you see the whole incident, like, you know, once they give you all the details, more context to certain situations, a lot of times I think it comes down to training. A lot of times I think it comes down to just, you know, the relationship between, you know, the African American community and law enforcement. You know, the communication is not there. A lot of times, some of these issues, you know, these situations, I think, can be avoided if the dialogue was set up correctly. And because a lot of times, like I said, civilians don't understand the law enforcement side of things. They're speaking two different languages. So, Ian, what you think about that, Chin?
I mean, I definitely agree with what you said about the misunderstandings between the two worlds, because you can't really understand what it's like to walk in another man's shoes unless you've walked in another man's shoes. Behind that, I think there's definitely subcontext that needs to be addressed. Like, if you look at the fact that the federal marshals, right, one of their very first tasks, their missions, was to hunt, capture, and/or kill runaway slaves. So it's like a you know, that's a subcontext for law enforcement in this country. And me also having been through law enforcement training, I see, like, when I went through the training, it was present there. It wasn't blatant racism. It wasn't blatant like, hey, go up and catch black people, hunt black people. go out and hunt civilians. It wasn't that. It's just idea that you're protecting and serving is almost paramount. It's not paramount to the idea that you got to make it home and you're dealing with animals, you're dealing with savages, you're dealing with monsters out there. So now when you give me a gun and I have a badge and I got to go out into the world and I've been trained that I'm dealing with savages and monsters and animals, right? I'm going to react no matter what color I am in a certain way, you know? So if I got to deal with somebody who might not be doing the right thing and I don't know this person, and my training, I'm falling back on my training. When my training is instilled in me, this might possibly be that savage. This might be that animal. It's not, this is most likely human that you're dealing with. This is most likely the person that can be talked to and reasoned with. And if I look at them in the eye and we go human, it might, we can resolve this, right? It's just get it done as fast as possible, because I could lose my life. I might not go home because this guy might be a savage.
So let me ask a question, because the word misunderstanding was used, but like when I hear training, to me now that's speaking about being taught, and I'm thinking about it from both ends, because on one side you say in law enforcement you're trained pretty much for survival to a certain extent, and on the other end, our interaction with cops as a civilian kind of teaches you what to expect out of them. You know what I mean? So is that a misunderstanding, or is that just the relationship that was built because a lot of the stuff that was taught overall?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does fall back on the relationship. But when I say misunderstanding, I mean, like with the idea of, okay, so, we've all been, I'm pretty sure all been, pulled over, one time or another in our lives, right? Whether we was law enforcement at the time or not, but pulled over at one time or another. When I say misunderstanding, man, if the thought is when you're behind the wheel of that car that the cop behind you means you complete harm when he comes up to that vehicle, right? Then that's going to put you in a different space, emotionally, anxiety, because you are thinking that he's already coming up here with the intent to, I'm going to say kill you, but with the intent to maybe do you harm, right? If that's what's going through your mind. When that's not the case. That's not the case initially. Put it like that. That's not what the case is with law enforcement. They're not there to just come out and just kill motherfuckers. That's not what it's about. And if you're thinking that when you're behind the wheel of a car, that's going to, cause some issues when you guys start to speak. You see what I'm saying? And again, this is not, because I don't want, no victim blaming stuff going on. I'm not saying that it's these guys' faults, that they've been killed, in these interactions. What I'm saying is, if I understand it, and Ian made it real clear when he said, go home, right? Because that's what they teach you in law enforcement. You want to go home at night. You want to go home at night. This is what your job is. You do this every day, right? You got like 25 years of this stuff. So you want to go home every single day. So, in a law enforcement officer's mind, that's what he's thinking. So when he gets up there, he has the same, anxiety and stuff that you might have, right? The miscommunication is when you guys first start to talk. What's the intent? What's the intent? Like, as a law enforcement officer, I want to get this shit done and over with as soon as possible. Let's go ahead and talk to you. Let me get what I need to get. Let me go ahead and straighten this out. If I'm going to give you a citation, I'm going to give you a citation. If I'm going to give you a warning, I'm going to give you a warning. But I want to ultimately let you go, or arrest you, or whatever it is, and get this thing over with.
So let me ask another question, and I'm gonna pass it to you in this time. Because usually one of the major outcomes that happen with a lot of the police shootings usually is riots after a while, like some kind of explosion. You could think of Ferguson and all these areas, but usually what you find out is not just that one incident that really caused it. It's usually a bunch of things that within that community. Usually to some extent it's like police harassment. You could take it back to Watts and all that stuff, and then this one incident is what exploded it. So I kind of go back to the idea of relationships. Like if you are, and I agree that if your outlook on a cop approaching you, is probably different from what their intent is when they actually are approaching you. But you also have this background with them, right? Or you have this stuff that's happening in the community because nobody's connecting, and that's when I go back to the training a little bit, because part of that is like being said is that it's a job as well. So it's not necessarily a physical connection. It's not a social connection. It's not like me going out talking to you. It's like I'm going to handle business. I'm gonna make this arrest. I'm gonna make this quota. I'm gonna get these tickets because that's what they told me to do and all this other stuff. And you do it the best way that you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And when we talk about maybe a power structure, is there? I don't want to say blame, but does the responsibility fall on one person more than another when it comes to a situation? Here.
So I talk about this all the time, and it's about community policing versus basically like expat policing. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Which means the community police, the community cop, he grows up in his neighborhood and he knows Jimmy from across the street, Miss Butler next door. He knows his teacher, Miss Sally, and the librarian, whoever. He knows the people in his community as he grows up as a child. And he grows up with his peers and the people that he eventually ends up policing. So now when you talk about rioting, right, and you talk about the straw that broke the camel's back, you don't really see that too much when you have a community policing situation, because the police in the area, the people who are policing their towns, and usually a small town, they arrive to a situation. There's a call put out, and they say, Jimmy from across the street, he was kind of a misfit growing up, but, I grew up with Jimmy. I know he's not a bad guy at heart. I know Jimmy's not a murderer. I know Jimmy's not going to try and kill me. When it comes down to it, Jimmy's drunk. He's having a bad day. Maybe he got into a fight with his girlfriend, and he's in a bad place right now. I show up to Jimmy. He's at a bar. Jimmy's fighting, and I can de-escalate that situation without getting it to any kind of fatal force, right?
Right.
Because I know Jimmy, and I don't need to draw out on Jimmy, right? If need be, I can sit on Jimmy for 4 hours, because at the end of the day, I grew up with this guy, and I have some love for him, right? Versus when you talk about Ferguson or Detroit or Chicago or NY or LA, these larger cities, they bring, like, I live in New York, so they bring a lot of the cops here, the NYPD, they come from Long Island, and they're stationed in Brooklyn in the pink houses. If you're familiar with those, the projects.
Yeah.
One of the worst projects in Brooklyn. They put him in the pink house. That's why you had the Asian dude. He went in the pink house his first day, shot somebody.
Exactly.
Is that his fault? Is that his fault? Kind of, yeah. But at the same time, the bigger onus is on, why are you bringing this guy that has no idea about anything to do with the pink houses and putting him in this situation where now he's scared to death? Because I'm from Brooklyn. I used to go to the pink houses and I hated it there. I get in and get out, get my hair braided and get out. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Shit. And when I walked out of there, I'm looking over my left, I'm looking over my right, I'm looking down, looking up. So imagine now I'm law enforcement and they already don't like me, right? So now you put in these officers in these situations, and behind that is the training, right? So now you talk about this atmosphere, right? The straw that broke the camel's back. It's a whole world that you're entering into now. The training behind it, the fact that the officers are not from these communities. They don't know anybody in the community. They see everybody as a potential threat. So now when they're getting these calls, they're showing up to the scene. They have to deal with these situations with strangers who might or might not be killers, right? Because it's a very real fact that you could show up and you deal with some guy who's nuts. Mm-hmm. This guy might come out and start blasting. You don't know, right? Because I never saw this guy before. So now the onus is on the department. It's really on both sides, because the department should be pulling from people that live in those communities. But then it's another thing, because a lot of the people in those communities don't want to police those communities because it's so crazy. So now you're going to something deeper, and you're talking about resources now. You're talking about funding now. You're talking about, you know, it's a much deeper conversation you're getting into with that.
So
Real
yeah,
deep,
let me direct it real quick. I'm sorry, Jay, for cutting you off, but let
No,
me
no,
direct
just saying real deep. Good.
I was saying, because now I gotta ask maybe on a personal level, because both of y'all, you know, Jay, you from the Bronx, Ian, you said you've been in the pick houses, which is I guess one of the worst parts in Brooklyn. So both of y'all have this experience from the outside going in, right? Um, did any of the training or anything that you learned when it comes to law enforcement change your mind state a little bit? Like when you approach situations now, do you still go back to your own background, or is it now more just about the job? Like, how do you weigh that out yourself personally between both of y'all?
Well, for me personally, during my years, it was it was a maturity thing too, and then it was also experience. Like as long as I never had the opportunity to be in law enforcement, I probably would have maintained that same type of attitude, like screw the police type stuff or whatever. But again, once you get in there and you start to see the training and understand why certain things are being done, why they approach certain. Now, don't get me wrong. Listen, there are some fucked up cops out there. All right, let me just be clear. But I don't want it to be that the whole institution of law enforcement, the idea of it, I don't think is completely corrupt. There are some people in there that screw it up, but the whole idea of it, what it is that they're training you to do, how it is that they want you to approach certain situations. And Ian made a real good point about the majority of these cops not being from the community. If these motherfuckers are scared, man, coming out of Long Island, they're scared to death coming out of Long Island. And when you start talking about responsibility at a department, you know, I think it would be really tough to kind of decide which rookie officers you're going to put in this section versus this section. Listen, there's areas, there's posts. This stuff needs to be covered, right? And I don't think they're gonna be babying anybody. If you law enforcement, if you went to the academy or whatever, you should be trained enough,
Yeah.
right? But the truth of it is that's not always the case. That's not always the case.
This is what I'm trying to aim at, because I'm trying to say, like, with you, being that you was raised up in some of these neighborhoods that you see is usually the ones where these situations happen. You know, that I don't know your full experience as a law enforcement. I'm pretty sure you had to approach people to a certain degree and question them. Like, so now when you see that person in front of you that you have to interact with, do you just see this as a regular person that you know from that you could have lived with you in the Bronx, or do you see him now as a perpetrator or a possible perpetrator?
I see again. So then that would be. I think black and white. That type of black and white policing is a problem. That's a real problem. I think everything is fucking gray for the most for me, right? Because you got to take situations case by case basis, and that's where the experience and stuff comes from. If I was from a certain community that I was now policing, with all of the experience I got from growing up there, there's a lot of things, a lot of strategies that I would use. One of the things that we had learned in law enforcement, was a technique called verbal judo, and it's where you go ahead and instead of you, like say you have an unruly individual you're dealing with, instead of going back at them with some unruly shit, you strategically start having conversations with them where you want to diffuse it. You use certain terminologies to diffuse the situation. You understand what I'm saying? So that would be one of those things that you would do first. The use of force continuum lets you know how you can escalate use of force depending on the situation. Verbal judo would be where I would start first. I'm not pulling a baton out first. I'm not pulling out some mace first. I'm not pulling out a taser first. I'm gonna start with verbal judo. Let me go ahead and see if I can diffuse the situation verbally first, and then we ain't gotta worry about no violence. You understand what I'm saying? So, but you don't get to that point until you actually experience in the law enforcement training. Until you get to that point, you can't have that kind of awakening. But and I'm not looking at just anybody from the Bronx as no perpetrator. I'm not looking at the situation just because the call came in as let's say say a call came in and somebody there was the talk of a firearm or something like that. So now my awareness is heightened. So now I know there's a firearm on the scene, but that doesn't mean I'm coming out guns a-blazing. You understand what I'm saying? I'm going to get there. I'm going to understand what the threat level is, and then I'm going to assess it.
There's a lot of times that calls come through from dispatch, with baseline information, but that's from people, who are on the scene. You don't have no idea. These people ain't, you don't know how credible they are. You understand what I'm saying? This is just based on information, just so the officers have hopefully some kind of idea what they're walking into. You see what I'm saying? But once you get there, you can find out that the threat level is nowhere near where it was when it came through with the phone call. You understand what I'm saying? So you got to go there with the idea that it's going to be gray and not necessarily black and white. Also, every time you hear somebody say, with a dispatch that there's a firearm, you coming out ready to kill somebody, and that's not necessarily the case.
So, Ian, how about you? How do you weigh out your personal experiences as a black man compared to law enforcement?
Man, that's a loaded question, man. That's because my personal experience with law enforcement has just about always been negative. Right. I've never had any encounters with law enforcement that have not been on the negative side, and we're talking about even being pulled over for a traffic infraction, and not saying that the officers were doing anything negative, but it was negative for me because the baseline of it was me walking down the street at 16, 17 years old, having, a squad car pull up, 2 officers jump out and throw me against the wall, pat me down, not say anything to me, maybe call me a punk or something like that and ask me where I'm going, and then cuff me and turn me around and have somebody look at me and say whether that's him or that's not him, and then say when it's all over with, after 45 minutes, I get the fuck out of here, So those are the kinds of experiences that my baseline with law enforcement were built off of. So now, even coming through the training, I think it actually gives me more perspective on how I'm supposed to deal with people, right? Because if I hadn't gone through that, if I hadn't come out of that realm, I might have gone in thinking, law enforcement is just, it's all good and so on and so forth. And now when I go through training, I'm like, damn, savages, monsters, got to get home safe. And now I'm just humbling energy of fear and I just want to get home at the end of the night. And personally, I will say this. I don't think that is the right mentality to have if I'm going to go into law enforcement, right? If I'm going to be, it depends on what I'm doing, but if I'm going to be on the streets, if I'm going to go into the streets, if I'm going in, right, I'm getting into the thick of things, and I'm thinking I got to get home no matter what, I'm going to shoot Tamir Rice. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull up on Tamir Rice, a 14-year-old boy with a toy gun, and say, you know what? It's either him or me. Personally, if I pull up on a 13-year-old boy, I'm probably going to get shot. I'm going to take that chance. That's just me, though, because the way that my mind is built, right, just for me personally, we'll talk about me personally, my experiences. When I look at a young black boy, I see the future. I see potential, right? Even if this kid is a drug dealer and a gangbanger, he's still potential, right? He's still somebody that could go in to the fire and come out of it and be a completely different person. He might be the next whatever. He might be the next leader, the next whatever it is, something positive. So if I enter into that realm now, I get this call, I got to pull up on this kid, or I got to deal with this kid, or whatever it is. If it's a kid, or even if it's a young black man, let's say he's 18, there's potential there for me, right? I see potential. I see potential in all my brothers, right? I see potential in all people, but especially my brothers. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to enter that. I'm not going to enter that scene saying to myself, no matter what, I got to go home. Because what that's going to do is going to lead me to actions that will ensure that I go home unnecessarily. You know what I'm saying? Like it might, like my brother said, if you walk into the situation thinking, okay, it's been called that there's a firearm on the scene, and my first thought is I got to make it home, then already in my mind, what am I going to do if I see a firearm? I'm a blast him. If he don't do what I ask him to do, I'm a blast him because I gotta get home. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of how it shapes me. You know, that's me personally. That's how it shapes my view on how I deal with situations.
So let me ask another question. Taking away from the individual, because I've started a lot nowadays to think about systems and the way systems work. And like Ian, you mentioned a little thing earlier in the episode about the ties between slave patrols and law enforcement. I think about certain parts of history where you see like Ku Klux Klan members getting into government and so forth, and law enforcement being one of them. And this is probably the foundation for a lot of the stuff that is probably still implanted within law enforcement. So I wonder, does any of that still play out to y'all? Like, do you see any maybe hints of it when y'all was in law enforcement that made you feel uneasy, or is it just like you said, it's just about the training personally to you?
Well, I mean, for me personally, yeah, of course, you see it, really uncomfortable things. But then I was always the type to speak up on certain things, as I saw it, and again, like law enforcement is one thing, the individuals involved with it are another. So if you can separate the two, if you can, say, law enforcement, we need it, but we don't need this bad apple, then, um, I think we can do better. I think the communication would be a whole lot better. But I mean, it goes that silence, that blue wall of silence there, where you know you it's kind of difficult, man, because in law enforcement, if you look at it like, say, a fraternity, right? Once you go ahead and, you go through this training and, you swear in and everything, now you're part of this brotherhood, right? So, it becomes one of these things where us against them, right? It becomes like that, and if you don't keep yourself focused when you're actually there, you can get swallowed up in that shit. And that's when you start seeing things where there's law enforcement officers of color out there doing some real strange shit in communities of people that look just like them, because they get into the law enforcement and they lose themselves with this blue wall of silence and this brotherhood stuff, man. And I mean, I saw it all the time. I saw it all the time. But again, as long as you stay conscious and you stay aware, you know what I'm saying? I mean, let me ask this question real quick, and I'm sorry I'm breaking off, because I wanna kind of talk about the idea of, why someone from like a community like Bronx or Brooklyn, from like a Soundview or a Pink House or whatever, and going through those experiences at that young age, what would make you turn to law enforcement in the first place? Like, if you were turned off about law enforcement, what made you think about going into it? If it was, I mean, let's just say, because it could be just about money. It could be just about the money, the stability or whatever. But I want to ask the question, to you specifically, Ian, like, why do you think someone would go into law enforcement after being, growing up in a situation where law enforcement interaction has always been negative?
I think it has a lot to do with understanding, right? I think it has a lot to do with, you get to a point where you see it, right? You see people break, you see people have interaction after interaction, and they don't understand why this is happening to them. And as a man, specifically as a man, because I can only speak from a man's standpoint, but I'm pretty sure it's probably the same for women, but definitely as a man, your dignity is important to you. Probably the most important thing to you is your dignity. And when your dignity is constantly stripped from you and dangled in front of you and stomped on the ground, and you have to deal with this over and over again, one or two things might happen. You become the angry black man who is out there saying fuck the police, and now anytime you have an interaction with them, you are on the verge of getting shot by them because you're like, you know what, I don't care, today I'm gonna be a man, and when it comes down to it, I'm gonna die with my dignity or nothing, right? Or you say to yourself, maybe I can get some understanding about this. Let me see what the other side is coming from. Let me see if I can weave my way around this and find dignity in understanding. And I think, for me, a lot of it was that, I understood that if I go through this training, if I become part of the other side, I will at least have gone through what it is to become law enforcement. And now I have that understanding, whereas before I did not. And I think a lot of the guys that I was in my academy with were the same way. I would talk to these brothers and they would say, I had no idea. I had no idea. I didn't know that this was what it was. And now that I do, I have a better perspective on the other side, the blue side. So I can now navigate through, these societal conflicts a little better.
So is it? Do you think a lot of stuff? I mean, we talked about community policing, but do you think a lot more of the issues that we see with police involvements could be done with more individuals who are related to the problems that is happening? Because I kind of think about, I don't know if you ever heard about the Stanford Project, which was the project where this psychologist, I guess, put two groups of people inside of a prison setting. And in that prison setting, some were the correctional officers, some were the prisoners. Automatically, the correctional officers started abusing their power, started, doing some inhumane things to the prisoners, and then they reversed the roles, and the same thing happened. And this is why I go back to the idea system, mainly because even when somebody has a good intent, which I believe that, because I think, like you said, I think some is money and benefits, which is normal. But then some, I think, is people who may be going in there trying to do good for the community because they see the stuff that's happening in the community. But once you get in there, you have all this other stuff like the training and bad intent from some of the other officers. And then you got some, riding with you where, I guess just being on from the outside, and this is me speaking from the outside, I find it hard to split that because even with my job, which I've never been in law enforcement, it's really glorified security guard at the best, that I see that same mentality. I see that same mentality of us versus them. You know what I mean? Like, I'm in uniform. This is who I am. All these other people, they don't understand. Maybe if they listen better or do what I tell them, it will be less of an issue. And I kind of maybe feel that's what transpires within that. So how do you keep that from leaking into you? How do you keep that from constantly going through the same cycles that we've gone through so far?
I just I had to stay grounded, man. Never forget my background, my experience and stuff. Like for me personally, I went into law enforcement because I didn't know what the fuck I was going to do in my life. Graduated high school, went around and did like, menial jobs, fucked around with the corporate world for a little while, but nothing substantial. And, when the opportunity came, I didn't know how to think about, like how to feel about it. Once I told people that I was, get involved with this, it's like, yeah, I could see you doing that, and I didn't see why they felt that way. It's like one of these things where people just say shit just cause, right? So I'm like, what about me makes you? What about me is law enforcement? Like what? But again, at that point in my life, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't want to do, like I didn't want to do the military. I hadn't really got into college, anything like that. So, for me, it was just, an option for me. And then when I got in there, it kind of opened up my eyes to a lot of stuff. So that's how I was introduced. So when I asked the question, like, with someone coming from, a background like from the Bronx or Brooklyn, what would make them go into law enforcement? When I think about me personally, that there wasn't anything other than just survival. I needed a
Money.
way. Exactly. That's what I needed. And, fortunately, that need drove me there, but the experience is valuable.
So now, Ian, with you, since you said that you went into it with try to get a better understanding of the other side, how is your sanity now? Now that you do have the understanding, how do you weigh it out?
So you get this question, right? Or statements that not all cops are bad cops, right? Not all law enforcement officers are bad law enforcement officers. And I always get backlash from my response to that. But I say, well, there's no such thing as a good cop, right? Because you're either a good person or you're a good cop, right? You can't be both. You can't be both a good person and a good law enforcement officer. Because law enforcement, the institution of law enforcement, calls on you to do horrible things to good people in order to be a good law enforcement officer. Right? Case in point, jaywalking is illegal in the state of New York. If I'm in NYPD, right, I'm supposed to cite you for that, for jaywalking, right? It's a victimless crime. No one's losing any money. No one's losing their life, right? But it's one of those crimes that were created like with the black codes, where like loitering or being outside a diner at 10 o'clock with white shoes on or something like that, now you could be convicted of a crime and sent back to the plantation because, with the 13th Amendment, it was a caveat to it. No one should be stripped of their right to be free and their liberty, lest they be duly convicted of a crime. So now you have that ingrained in law enforcement. And as a law enforcement officer, you are called upon, especially like beat cops. I know a lot of them, they're called them, you got to meet a quota now, right? So now in order for you to meet that quota, you got to go out there and be a bad person. Now you're picking on good people in order to get results for a quota, in order to sustain your job or get a promotion, right? So you might start out as a good person, but if you want a career in law enforcement, you can't maintain that goodness. Not if you want to raise to the ranks, right? You can't maintain that. Now you can become a law enforcement officer and say, hey, I'm going to see this crime, which is a victimless crime, a harmless crime. No one's losing any money, no damage to property, nothing like that. They're just chilling in the park. And I'm going to leave them alone. But you ain't doing your job. And now you're a bad law enforcement officer because you're not doing your job. You're a good person because it was just kids hanging out in the park, not doing anybody any harm. But as a law enforcement officer, you're supposed to go and disrupt that. And that might turn into something where somebody gets strangled or choked or shot to death. You know what I'm saying? So that's the realm that we live in. As law enforcement officers, you got to make that determination on when do I turn on the good person or when do I turn on the good officer. And if I turn on the good person, then the other officers around me are looking at me like, yo, that's a shit officer. Right.
So now I also gotta ask, like, how do you weigh out laws? Because I'm thinking now that some of that has to be the laws, right? Because you put this, like you said, you put this guideline, this SOP, standard operation procedure in front of you. This is what you're supposed to do. I always hear a quote when people say things are lawful, and then usually the response is, slavery was lawful. You know what I mean? Slavery was a law at one point. Exactly. So now when you have this, how much is that play into how you act out in your job? Like, is that probably, I guess, maybe, let me rephrase the question. Is that more prominent than anything else when it comes to your job, the actual laws?
Nah, because, so to me, I have a job to do, right? And my job pays the bills. And some laws are necessary to keep the order of society, right? As it pertains to my job, a lot of the laws are necessary to maintain the order of society, you know. So, but it's on a case by case basis. You know, you got to look at the situation differently every time. And sometimes, you know, as the brother was talking about earlier with verbal judo, right? Part of that is knowing who you're dealing with, right? It's not going to work on everybody, and it's not going to apply to every situation with every law. But most times, you can kind of take the approach of, okay, I'm dealing with a human being here who has wants, who has needs, who has loves in his life, who has desires and dreams and goals, you know, fears. He's just like me. She's just like me. If I apply this pressure of the law too hard on this person, it could destroy them, right? Do I want to be in the business of destroying people, or do I want to be in the business of protecting people, right? And is it worth sometimes it for me to destroy one person in order to protect others? Or, you know, do I protect everybody? You see what I'm saying? So the laws are not written to protect everybody. They're not written to protect the totality of society. The laws are written to protect a percentage of society. And some of us are in that percentage and some of us aren't. So when I come across people who aren't in that percentage, now my human side kicks in, you know, and sometimes I got to do things that I'm not comfortable with. But in the overall picture, you know, I guess for me, it comes down to if I go home and can I look at my kids and my wife in the face, and can I look at myself in the mirror and be comfortable as a man with who I am? Because one day this job will end and I will continue to be on this earth as a man, you know, God willing. So that's how I navigate each individual situation. It's kind of like, can I look at myself in the mirror? You know, after this incident happens, what am I going to think about myself, and what will the people that love me think about me? You know?
Right. I think like also, I mean, this is why I say I approach situations as in being great. Is imagine, let's take, you know, with TSA, right? The SOP, if it's considered black and white. You right now know that there's some shit listed in the SOP, right? That you put it into real world practice on that checkpoint, the shit doesn't make any sense, right? You have to determine on scene, like right there, is this going to work or is it not going to work? I mentioned that use of force continuum specifically because people always wonder, you know, if the intent is to just come out and just shoot first and ask questions later. You know, the law enforcement officers are trained. They use the force continuum, and I use the verbal judo at the very bottom because it's nonviolent. It'll start from the most nonviolent approach and to go to, you know, of course, deadly force being, you know, ultimately the highest level of the use of force and stuff. But I mean, you gotta be focused. You gotta use your brain. This law enforcement is not a brainless job. It's thankless, but it's not brainless, man. You have to really be focused, locked in, and you really got to understand what you're doing. And training is key as well. Training is key as well. Not just the fact that you were in the class and you participated. You really need to be in there. You need to learn what's going on. You need to be able to, you know, pass this stuff. You know, I know I was down there in training, man, and you used to see some instructors just really like move individuals along just for numbers. That shit works then. But then, you know, a year, 18 months from now, when that individual kills somebody because they're not properly trained, what happens then? What happens?
You know, I don't know. That seems like a complex question, but you know, I kind of, you know, again from the outside, I kind of think about this quote somebody told me was about religion, but I feel applies with everything that good people are going to do good, bad people are going to do bad, and I'm glad at least both of y'all, who I consider good brothers, has some, you know, has some kind of input into that system. You know, I wish it was more y'all, but I'm gonna open it up so y'all could end it and give y'all last review.
Oh yeah. Well. Yeah. Matter of fact, I'll let you go ahead and say something, brother.
I mean, I think what I want to come away with, what I want people to come away from this conversation with, is to understand that there are that is deeper, right? Because you get a lot of people out there thinking that, oh, you just got these bad people out here murdering folks or beating up on folks and just out there ready to attack. And when you get pulled over, they just, the law enforcement is out here to destroy everybody. And that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, you do have individuals that grow up in abusive households and they just want to enact anger, or they're just angry people. They want to enact anger, so they become police officers so that they can get a badge and a gun and some authority, and now they can act that anger out on society. But I think more so, I think on a larger scale, I think it's the training of law enforcement, if anything, that needs to be addressed. Talking to a law enforcement officer from Finland, and I didn't know this, but they go to academy for 2 years. They go to military. That's basically what they do. They go away to the military to become a police officer. My training was 4 months. I think, other academies, 4.5. Other academies do 6, some do a year, off and on. But some of that is not even really law enforcement training. It's more like mathematical stuff. So taking that putting that in perspective, the training that you get is like this. It's quick. It's fast. It's over in a heartbeat. And then you're thrown out there into whatever your situation is. And now you expected to be able to fall back on that training as if it were something ingrained into you. And the training also needs to be tweaked. But I think there needs to be a lot more. I think it needs to be something where like you said, you've seen people be pushed through. That's another thing. The training should not be something you can push through.
Exactly.
Either you are here or you are not. And if you are proven through psychological testing, fitness testing, whatever it is, they put you in these situations over time and time and time again, and you are not there, then you should not be out in law enforcement, because you are going to be that guy who either gets one of your own killed, gets yourself killed, or kills somebody else, right? And but the public, the civilians should know that, you have these situations where somebody gets stopped by the police officer and they do everything that they're supposed to do and still get beat up on and still get shot, right? And a lot of the times what happens is that's still the training, because that guy absorbed the training the wrong way. He took it as, they teach us use as much force, more force early to avoid using deadly force later, right? Basically, that's what we're trained to use as much force as early as possible, right? So that we can de-escalate the situation before it gets to a deadly force situation. Mm-hmm. And so even if somebody's being somewhat compliant, but they're having an attitude, or maybe they're a little scared, so they're being rigid, this guy's falling back on his training, is saying, okay, more, instead of me just, taking him to the ground. I gotta elbow him in his back. I gotta elbow him in the back of his head, and then, he got a concussion now or something like that. So the training needs to be addressed. And so I want people to come away from the conversation thinking, when you're out there and you're dealing with law enforcement, understand that you're not dealing with necessarily bad people. A lot of the times you're just dealing with bad training. And if we take that approach to it, we'll stop coming at each other as bad people, like bad cop versus bad civilian, coming at each other saying, bad system. Let's all deal with this bad system. Let's deal with this bad training. All right. And
Jay, that's dope. Jay, I'm gonna let you close it out, bro.
Yeah. Listen, man. Everything that Ian just said, man. I don't think I can say it any better. It all comes down to training when you start talking about accountability from the law enforcement side. You put someone out there that's ill-equipped to handle that job, and issues are going to happen. That's about the best I can express this, man, folks. It was real early. Hit you with some real good stuff. Take care of this business. Like, share, subscribe, and always comment. I'd like to thank my man Ian for coming by, sharing his expertise on this. Appreciate it, brother. DB, glad to see you, man. Reality Gurus. Take care.